What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is your boy Frankie Bones, and in today's video, going to be hopping into Yankee Universe, talk a little bit about the first half, obviously as we have hit the All-Star break earlier on this week, and we're just going to break everything down. We're going to talk some stats from the first half, talk about key takeaways, overall talk about some deadline decisions that may or may not need to be made in order to compete here in October. Parlaying with that, talking about the October outlook in terms of how the second half may look and ultimately how it will impact our chances at another World Series championship that we're so desperately chasing. And ultimately, a little spin-off of who's on deck. We'll talk about who's in the hole, sort of preview the second half of the Yankee series in terms of some of the series that they have coming up here in the second half of the season. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like. As well, if you guys are new, make sure to subscribe to the channel to not miss out on any Yankees content coming throughout the rest of the season. So without further ado, we'll hop into some of the stats. We'll hop into midsummer statistics, talk about some of the things from the first half. Overall, the Yankees, 7 games over 500, good for a record of 49 and 42. That'll be 4th place in the AL East. Again, very competitive this year, as in recent years past. The Yankees are 8 games back of Tampa Bay, who again had an incredible first half. And the Yankees are 1 game back in the wild card category, 1 game back of Toronto and Houston, who are tied, and we'll talk a little bit about that race a little bit later on here in the video. So to talk about some offensive numbers here, the slash line overall for the team, 231, 300, and 410. Really pretty pathetic numbers for this lineup that we have in place here. Another pretty tough number to see, a 96 WRC plus, weighted runs created, and 100 is average here. So by the numbers, a below average lineup, and a lot of that comes from Aaron Judge as well. So just imagine that number without the captain in the lineup. Talking about our strikeout to walk ratio, or strikeout to walk percentage, I guess. These are all from Fangraphs. Just about 22 Ks per 8.4 walk. So would love to see the walk number higher. Would love to see that on-base percentage higher overall, but obviously beggars can't be choosers here in this category. We'll talk a little bit more about this stat in particular here as we move on with the video. 129 home runs as a team overall, as well as 54 stolen bases. Just about, a third of these, under a third of these coming from Anthony Volpe. So just have to make more impact, and again, another stat that we'll talk about later on in the video. Moving on to our starting pitching, again, a sort of general overview of the general team stats here. 4.31 ERA, 4.54 FIP, which is fielding of independent pitching. Talking about our K to walk ratio, 22.3 to 7.8. A decent strikeout rate, but obviously would love to see more dynamic stuff from our starters. Walk ratio really not too bad overall. Talking about our runners left on base percentage, just under 3/4, so 72.3, not bad. 38.1 ground ball percentage, and just under 1.5 home runs per 9. Would love to see this number come down a lot. Our starters have been plagued by the home run ball a lot throughout the first half of the season, and just an easy way to sort of cut down runs, and just with our left on base percentage, a good way to limit the damage here. And with some of the offensive woes, which we'll talk about again, definitely could be a help to get us to stretch out some games here in the second half. And the last couple statistics that we'll talk about here in this video, we'll talk about the bullpen. 3.11 ERA, that's best in the MLB. 3.79 FIP. talking about our K to walk ratio, 23.4 to 9.8. So walk ratio up a little bit higher, as well as the strikeout percentage, but this is something that's really great. Just under 76% left on base percentage. Overall, as a team, I think that's pretty solid. This factors in everybody that's pitched in later innings and hasn't started the game, so number would be a little bit higher without a couple of guys here in the mix here in Fangraphs. 51% ground ball percentage, which is really, really good and really allows you to get out of those late innings, and 0.71 home runs per 9. So just a broad base to give you guys some perspective on some of the stats from the first half, and we'll touch on some of these as well as we move on throughout the video. Moving on to some of our key takeaways from the first half of the 2023 MLB season. The first thing that has to be noted is that the Yankees are probably the most inconsistent offensive lineup in the MLB. We see an outpouring of runs in certain games, and even within the same series, the Yankees' offense seemingly goes dormant. 2-3 hits, no runs, and that's something that's unacceptable. I mean, as a team, I don't know if it's the mentality. I don't know if it's, clearly not the pitcher, because I'm really, really very confident in this lineup overall, but the inconsistency is really tough. The starting pitching has been pretty serviceable, and the bullpen has been pretty dominant, so just need to find a way to put up a couple of runs here, and it's definitely something to highlight here throughout the first half. That was a theme that definitely led us to lose a fair amount of these games we've lost so far. Only giving up 2-3 runs a game and still losing those games is definitely unacceptable here in this scenario. Moving on to our second key takeaway, we'll talk about the bullpen. They've absolutely anchored this Yankees team and allowed them to win as many games as they have to this point. Just wanted to highlight a few guys that have really been dominant to this point so far, and a couple all-star snubs that I feel were deserving of the honor. So the first one is Clay Holmes. He hasn't particularly been in that closer role per se. Sort of since the first few weeks of the season, first month of the season, he hasn't necessarily been the quote-unquote closer for the squad. If he was, I feel like he definitely would have gotten the nod in the situation over some of the other guys in the AL bullpen for the All-Star game, but he's been dominant. His ground ball percentage has been great. He has not been allowing runs, tons of ground balls, tons of strikeouts. His command has been really good, and looking forward to seeing him build on the success here in the second half. Tommy Kahnle, very similar. Obviously not really enough innings to apply here, but still has not really given up an earned run here on the season. His stuff has been really incredible in terms of the middle to the beginning of the high leverage innings. His fastball has played really, really well, including his power changeup. They play off each other very well, and he's been a great re-addition to this Yankees bullpen. Wandy Peralta pitching incredibly well for this team as well, sort of our lead lefty in terms of high leverage situations here. Great sinker, great changeup as well. I love that. A lot of the guys in this bullpen have that stuff that play off each other very well, and another all-star snub potentially, but he's been doing his job back in the pen, and always love to see Wandy fired up to be coming into the game. The last guy that we're going to talk about in terms of the bullpen is Ian Hamilton. Just came back from injury. Been a little bit weird in terms of his usage since he came back, but the Slambio is absolutely dominant. He's had really, really good stuff throughout the framework of the year, and he's been a really impactful reliever for this team, and looking forward to seeing how they continue to use him throughout the season. The next key takeaway I want to talk about, the situational hitting and running has been just awful for this team. When we get into those high leverage spots, we haven't been able to convert, whether it's hitting a ball to the right side, stealing that extra base running, taking that extra base, whether it's getting good leads, whether it's good reads out of the dirt. We've had a difficult time with sort of producing these runs and manufacturing them throughout the season, and would like to see this team step up in this department and, just sort of make a mentality switch, because ultimately these are things that, as a team, are really easy to do. Obviously, putting the bat to the ball is not easy, but having the opportunity to move runners over, put guys in position to score, and sort of capitalize on it, runners in scoring position especially, the Yankees have not been fantastic in that department, and 1 or 2 runs definitely make the difference, especially when you have the dominant bullpen that you have, and in outings where your pitchers are throwing really well, really giving them an opportunity to capitalize on that rather, and put a statistic in the win column. So interesting to see how maybe the mentality switches up here in this department. And finally, the last key takeaway that we'll talk about, Yankees hire a new hitting coach, Sean Casey, teammate of Aaron Boone back when he was on the Reds, career 500 hitter, played over a decade in the MLB. Definitely a switch up from Dylan Lawson, and curious to see how much of an impact that he's going to be able to make on this team, whether it's mentality, preparation. Overall, just want to see the impact that he's able to make, and at the end of the day, this is sort of definitely a pick from Boone, and it was agreed upon by the GM and from Hal, so definitely don't want to slight that there, but at the same time, he sort of handpicked this guy. He's been working at him for years, and curious to see the impact that he's been able to make. I know that I've heard about the energy and sort of the mentality switch, so curious to see if there's an instant sort of jump there, a honeymoon period, if you will, and throughout the second half, how he's ultimately able to affect this lineup. Moving on now to some deadline decisions that the Yankees may or may not make, sort of based off of some rumors and things that we've heard on Twitter and throughout the community. First thing I want to talk about is that the Yankees should definitely consider looking into packages for both Shohei Ohtani and Juan Soto if they indeed are both selling. Both teams have sort of cooled off here as we reach the midsummer break, and ultimately, if things end up in the right scenario, both teams potentially could be selling. Shohei Ohtani, a true rental, obviously going to get a monumental deal here after this season, but gives the Yankees a chance to win here, bolster the rotation, give them a dominant left-handed hitter in Yankee Stadium, which we have been looking for desperately, over the past, I would say, decade, honestly. And the same thing would go with Juan Soto. He has 2 playoff pushes in him this year, and he'll be a free agent following the next season. So 1.5 full years of Juan Soto, instant impact, good with the glove, a guy that has won a championship before and is looking to win another. So I think that both would be good fits, just sort of depending on what the package will be and if the Yankees are able to match potentially what other teams may be gunning for, including the Rangers and the Rays. In division will be tough, but would definitely be on the pulse in terms of what those packages may look like. Moving on to our second bullet point here in deadline decisions, the Yankees need to make a decision on Oswald Peraza, and in my opinion, he either needs a shot to play or he needs to be traded, because over the past probably month, kind of forget exactly when he came back from his injury that he had in the minor leagues, but he's been absolutely tearing it up. His glove has looked great. Obviously, people that are not familiar, another middle infield prospect for the Yankees, and Anthony Volpe kind of hopped him a little bit. They both played at the beginning of the season. Peraza ends up going back down as guys become more healthy, and he might really be able to make an impact for this team if it were to be called up and stay with this clubhouse. I would potentially look for him to play an everyday third base role, potentially second base. I mean, Gleyber's made a ton of errors, but I think the Yankees really like his bat and buy into the promise of Gleyber overall. So potentially could see him at third base for DJ LeMahieu. In this instance, we would cut bait with Josh Donaldson, who basically is only hitting home runs when we're up big or losing big. Really just a very small impact from him from the eye test, and sort of allowed DJ LeMahieu to be a flex fit for this team. Defensively, he continues to be incredibly solid, but offensively, just really a terrible year for him, and is really puzzling overall from a fan perspective. Moving on to our third bullet point, does his rotation need another arm? So there isn't that sort of high leverage guy here in this trade deadline scenario. I know we have a couple more weeks to play out, but sort of projecting forward, really not a top-of-the-line guy like Luis Castillo of last year. The Yankees end up settling for Frankie Montas, and we obviously know what ends up happening with him. But with Luis Severino going through these woes, Clark Schmidt has been really good as of recent, so I'm going to knock on wood here that he continues to pitch well for this team. But him and Domingo Germán, the consistency is definitely a question, so I'm curious to see if they can add a sort of backline starter, another arm, sort of a 3 to 5 starter that can make an impact on this team, give them consistent starts, and give them a couple of wins that are going to be really important here coming down the stretch. And finally, the last deadline decision, depending on Aaron Judge, his timeline, obviously a lot of it is murky. Are we going to need another outfielder? To this point, obviously Bauer's currently on the 10-day. IKF has been good, but Harrison Bader now has been on the IL twice for 2 decently long stints to this point. You never really know exactly what will happen when Giancarlo Stanton. Willie Calhoun is down, and just makes you wonder, are we going to bring in an insurance option and give us a little more flexibility throughout the season in terms of coverage at that position, especially when Judge comes back? How often is he going to be able to play, really valuing that DH position? And are we going to be able to juggle guys in the outfield that continue to produce and make an impact on the game? So definitely a really valid question here as the deadline approaches over the next few weeks. Now we'll move on to the October outlook, sort of talking about this second half and what a run for a championship potentially might look like for this Yankees team. I'm still pretty confident that if everybody's healthy and sort of clicking at the right time, obviously 2 very big factors for this team that have not gone right to this point, but I'm still pretty confident this team is going to be able to potentially make some splashes depending on certain of their players, and a lot of top-line guys that if they're playing well can really propel this team to some high heights. So the first bullet that I want to talk about, the AL East is still very much up for grabs. Everything is still really close within the division. Tampa Bay here in first. Baltimore Orioles are only 2 games back. Toronto 7 games back. Yankees 8 games back. Boston 9 games back. So everybody's within single digits, and everybody knows how baseball goes. You're one injury, one tough stretch away from giving up a ton of games. I know that the Rays just sort of went on that stretch. I think they lost 7 of 8. The Yankees, unfortunately, were not able to capitalize. The Orioles were in order to get to 2 games back, which, speaks to the caliber of their team. They're really legit contenders this year, and really going to be mixy as we get down to the brass tacks here at the end of the season in terms of who's going to be able to lift the division title. Parlaying off of that point, the AL wildcard is going to be incredibly chaotic. Obviously, we just highlighted how close a lot of the teams are in the AL East, and most likely we'll see 3 teams represented here in the American League East. Who knows? I would say it's definitely 3 because the AL West definitely looking really formidable as well. But talking about the Central, Cleveland in first. Minnesota Twins are just a half game back. I think Cleveland is 500, so really the loser of this division is most likely going to be out of the picture unless they make a really good run, both teams. But the main focus is on the AL West. The Texas Rangers are in first here, with the Houston Astros in second. Definitely a position that they are not super familiar with over the past 5-6 years. They've dealt with a ton of injuries. They're only 2 games back in this scenario, as well as the Seattle Mariners, 6 games back. Really, really potent offense and some great young pitching, so they may be able to make a run here at the end of the season. The third bullet that I want to talk about, and we touched upon it a little bit in the last segment, but Aaron Judge needs to have a healthy return, and he needs to return soon. Obviously, a lot of things are murky in terms of his time frame, in terms of recovery. Obviously, there has not been anything substantial to sort of go off of and sort of base a timeline off of, but He stayed home in New York to receive treatment. Hopefully, as we turn the page here to the second half of the season, he continues to progress, continues to throw, and ultimately take those steps to get himself back on the field. If he does so, I think that having him back in the lineup, both offensively and defensively, really creates a much better situation here for the Yankees and may propel them to potentially take this division. And going off of that, for our last bullet, Carlos Rodon and Nestor Cortez being both at 100% here over the next few weeks is going to be incredibly important for the Yankees to make a run. Our starting pitching has really not been great throughout the season. A much better word to use here is inconsistent, but as Carlos Rodon continues to build back up to 100%, he made his debut. He's going to throw today as this video comes out. I'm recording this here on Thursday night. He'll be pitching tonight. I'm not sure exactly what his pitch count will be. He threw 69 the other night, maybe get him up to 80, 85, but his stuff looks good. And to be honest, if him and Nestor Cortez both come back fully healthy and are able to have some time and some runway to be able to get into a rhythm leading up to the playoffs, I think that this team really has some dynamic arms, some different arms that give teams a lot of trouble here. Obviously behind Garrett Cole, who's been very, very dominant in the starter for the AL in the All-Star game. So if these guys are able to pitch well, maybe we make a move. Maybe a guy like Luis Severino is able to step up, fix his issues. Clark Schmidt continues his consistency. Domingo Germán figures it out. I think this Yankees lineup, in terms of their starting pitching and staff overall, is in a pretty good spot, and I think that these guys are going to be key pieces moving forward throughout the second half of the season. And finally, the last thing that we'll talk about here in this video, sort of breaking down the first half and projecting out what will happen the rest of the season. We'll talk about who's in the hole, who's coming up throughout the second half of the season for the New York Yankees. As you guys can see the graphic, a little bit daunting in terms of the teams that we have to play and sort of how our schedule lined up here as we close out the season. These are obviously not in order. These are, I guess, somewhat in order, but at the same time, these are just more or less put on the graphic here. The Yankees have 2 games against the Mets earlier on here. Fortunately, the Yankees only have 3 games against Tampa moving forward, so that would obviously be an incredibly important series for the Yankees to win. Talking about the Orioles, again, another division rival. We have 3 games both home and away against the Orioles, so really would be important to take the rest, not the rest, but take a majority of these 6 games. 4 out of 6 would be incredible here in this scenario. Try and make up a little bit of ground here and pray for some losses. The Yankees have 6 more games against the Boston Red Sox. They've struggled against our big-time rival, and obviously I'm not going to allow the Nestor comments to play it down. Obviously, this is probably the best rivalry in sports. In my opinion, it definitely is, but some critical games for the Yankees. Talking about a pseudo-rivalry over the last handful of years. The Yankees have 7 total games against the Houston Astros, 4 at home and 3 on the road, so would definitely be critical for the Yankees to take this series, especially if it comes down to the wild card. To have the opportunity to get a handful of games here and put ourselves in a good position if that is the scenario. The Yankees have 3 games against, or at home rather, against the Arizona Diamondbacks, a team that's been very surprising, a great young team, some pretty solid pitching as well throughout the mix, but a really potent and dynamic offense as well at the same time. Corbin Carroll has been awesome for my fantasy team, but hopefully not in this series in the Bronx. Definitely be an interesting series there. The Yankees have to travel down to Atlanta to play what I think is definitely the best team in baseball for a 3-game set against the Braves. This will be really, really tricky for this team and sort of in the latter portion of the year. So who knows? It could definitely be a momentum point for this team if we're able to win this series and move on from there and potentially keep rolling as we approach October. And finally, we'll talk about our last division rival, the Toronto Blue Jays. The Yankees have 6 games against them as well, 3 at home and 3 on the road. So again, another great opportunity to pick up some games against a division rival and sort of climb our way back up towards the top. Again, the Yankees are in 4th place here, so sort of any game against a division rival is pretty pivotal at this point. The Yankees are only 1 game above the Boston Red Sox for last place here in the AL East, and just going to be important to win games. It's as simple as that, and hopefully the team has a shift in mindset and is ultimately ready to try and run this gauntlet, get healthy, and continue the momentum from earlier on here in the second half, be able to build that and ride it out into potentially a playoff run into October. I'm pretty confident if we can stay healthy and the boys can get rolling with a nice, healthy mindset and good leadership from Boone, I think anything is possible, and who knows, maybe my Yankees future just may cash for a nice lump sum. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. Let me know down in the comment section below what you thought of the Yankees' first half overall, what you project the Yankees to do in the second half, maybe what moves they may look to make at the trade deadline, what changes need to happen, maybe within the locker room, positionally within the lineup. I'd love to hear your guys' opinion, but if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like. If you guys are new, make sure to subscribe to not miss out on any Yankees content throughout the rest of the season. But for now, this has been your boy Frankie Bones, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Peace out.